And I think what I love about everything in terms of technology is that stats it can give you. I'm a big basketball fan too, and I'm a big rugby and cricket fan, of course. So it's all about the stats, as you know, right? It's all about, hey, what's your percentage to field goal? How, are you hitting a three-pointer? What about your 4s and 6s when it comes to cricket? It's the same kind of thing. It's the ability to kind of dig in and go, hey, that's what the top talent does. And this is where the C players need to step up their game in terms of, if you need to get to where they want to be. So, again, data-centric, going back to really good insights and making those decisions.
I'm Devin Reed.
And I'm Sheena Badani.
And you're watching Reveal, the Revenue Intelligence podcast powered by Gong.
Keep watching here to see the full interview. Or if you like to listen to podcasts on the go, check out the links in the description below.
And if you like what you hear, subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify. Or all of them. Why not? And while you're there, make sure to leave us a 5-star review. We personally read every single one, and I think I speak for both of us when I say they mean the world to us.
Could not agree more, Devin. Now, without further ado, here's the episode you've been waiting for. So, Ricky, while we were just having a little conversation before we hit record over here, you were talking about getting ready for your first trip outside of New Zealand to the States and the UK next week. How do you feel?
That's, hey, so exciting, right? It's been a long time coming, 2 years we've been in this. So leaving borders, leaving New Zealand, it's been a struggle, as we all know. But obviously health and priority's been put at, in the top of the list. So, but excited about, catching up with the team in the UK and US. We've had such a growth. We've had so many new people come on board. So to actually connect with them in a social setting and work setting, so just really excited. Looking forward to connecting.
Oh, that's amazing. We are excited for you. So let's get into a little bit of your background. Today you're CRO at simPRO, but you didn't actually grow up in sales like a lot of traditional CROs. Your background is actually in engineering, which is really, really interesting. So would love to just hear how you think your background, engineering driven, helped prepare you to run a sales org today.
Look, great question. Tough one. You're right, somewhat different. I guess you got to be you. For me, sales is all about solving problems, right? I think engineers, by the way they think about things, it's all about solving the problems, thinking before you act. Selling is no different to me. So selling is basically just bunch of steps. You got to break it down before you actually act. So I think in terms of what I've learned from the engineering side of things is really just kind of looking at the problem, breaking it down into small pieces, and then acting it. So again, selling is all about making sure we're solving the problem for customers. So we just kind of reverse engineer that. That's kind of how my brain naturally works. It's kind of worked its way, and I think that's the kind of model I naturally gravitate to. But I think there's a lot of things in common between sales and engineering.
I love the scientific and data-driven approach to sales that you bring. That, of course, resonates with us a lot. But I'm sure as you stepped into this role, there were some gaps and maybe areas where you felt you needed to develop, coach yourself, spend time learning. What were those areas? What were those skills that you felt you need to focus more on?
Oh, you're making me vulnerable now. But look, great question, right? So selling is more than just what we just talked about before. It's just more than process. It's also about negotiation skills. I've got to be honest, we're missing the whole money mindset. Doesn't come naturally because engineers are introverts. We're all about, hey, listening and perhaps taking all that into consideration. So the gaps were more about making sure the problem solving is one thing, but it's got to fit commercially, right? So making sure that all of that had to be worked up. And I think what I mean about money mindset is I think salespeople in general are great at having they're looking at the prize, they're looking at the size of the prize and then going after it. Engineers naturally are about breaking it into processes and steps. So getting grips with that and making sure that we love language of the two matches up was probably a big barrier that I had to come over. So it's still a work in progress. It's something I'm having to work through day by day, but it's been great learning, and I'm surrounded by a great bunch of team members who I learn from more than I can teach. So that's been awesome.
So you've made the connection of, engineers take big problems, break it down step by step. It's all about problem solving. So is sales. So my question is almost just going to disregard that in a way and still dig in for a story here. Because Ricky, I've never worked in all my years of sales, worked for a, sales leader who comes from an engineering background. So I'm curious, do you have a time where maybe you solved a problem differently than a traditional sales leader or maybe a traditional sales background or approach would have?
Look, for me, it's all about peace, love, and data-driven decisions. I think what Sheena just mentioned earlier, right? So it's, obviously being an empathetic leadership is hugely important in any type of leadership skills, but going to data, that's my source. So I'm looking at problems, I'm kind of really putting people aside, and I'm going, where's the break in the chain? And then what needs to be, whether it be middle of the funnel, top of the funnel, bottom of the funnel. So close win rate. So looking at more into where is the link that gets broken down, and then kind of deep diving in and using the tech stack that's available to us. So fortunate now too, like leading a team in this era where you're surrounded by great technology, you have the ability to actually dig deep. So to me, Devin, it's all about really just kind of getting into that. So whether it be, using Gong, using your CRM, and really kind of working through, and then, using the data to drive decisions as opposed to one-off. So naturally, look, I can't really compare myself to other sales leaders. I think a lot of sales leaders that I've worked with, they're outcome-based, and that's awesome. Then that needs to be there. I tend to fall back to something that has to be repeatable process, something that you can scale, something that you can just go each and every time, and that there's consistency. So being inconsistently consistent doesn't really work in sales, as we all know. So I flip the script and I just go, hey, if we just run it A to Z and we run it each and every time, you can scale that model. You can pass it on to however many reps and sales leaders. So whichever problem it may be, Devin, whether it be sales or technology or whatever purchasing you're doing, I just fall back to that.
I like it. Totally makes sense.
When I think of kind of an engineering-driven approach, I think about experimentation and, testing to see what works and then scaling. So I'm curious if you have any experiences with bringing an experimentation what's the word?
Experiential.
Experiential? I don't think that's right. An experiment-driven culture to your org.
Yeah. Look, great question. You're starting to. It sounds like we're talking the same love language. So, A/B testing, I'm a huge fan of. It's something we do quite often, especially with the global scale of our business, right? So what we may do at any given time is try something out in a particular market on a smaller scale and then refresh it, fine tune it, and then work it up. So that's kind of been our method to success or madness, depending on how you look at things. So a lot of A/B testing in every part of the way we do things, that's kind of embedded into our culture and DNA. Sheena, so whether it be we're going to launch a new campaign, whether we're going to now do this or change the way we do things, we always like to try things first, as you said. So again, falling back to engineering way, a lot of it was about experiments, a lot of it was about getting to the point of perfection. However, before getting there was a lot of failures, there was a lot of breakdowns. So we like to learn from our failures and then get to a point where it's repeatable and scalable, as you say.
Are there any of those failures that you can tell us about?
That's our favorite, Ricky. If you,
so I'm throwing all these new questions into the script, so getting you on your feet.
Yeah, absolutely. Depending on how long you've got. Many. We've tried in the way that we've sort of restructured our business. Sometimes we've got that wrong in terms of perhaps focusing too much on the inbound versus outbound, getting that right. Per geo is hugely important. What necessarily works in one geo doesn't work in the other. So, it's, again, taking learning and being adaptable and just actually being agile. I think a lot of people use that terminology, but not quite sure what that means. So for us, look, we tried that. We tried the whole inbound engine. That worked very successfully in this part of the market. Does not quite resonate with, particularly the US market. So there it's a case of blending the two, going into a hybrid capacity. So there's been a lot of learnings along the way, but that really just comes to mind, is that one thing may work here, but not somewhere else.
Yeah, that's a great point. And overall, the word agile is really came from a software development area anyway. And now we've kind of pulled that into the go-to-market side of things, like how entire teams can stay agile. But that concept was also engineering driven.
Yeah, absolutely. But again, going back to we can learn a lot from each other, right? So I think engineers and tech co-workers are so detail orientated. So everything kind of goes back to what can be repeatable, how do you break down the barriers, then how do you work out a solution. So I think in many ways, I know Devon said that he hasn't worked for any engineers, leaders, but I frankly do think the two have a lot in common than most people realize.
Well, we're all about debunking misconceptions here, so happy to get taught something. And I'd like to dig into that a little bit more because, surprise, surprise, I'm an extrovert, ex-salesperson. One of the things I had to learn to do was to listen better because I always thought, hey, I'm a good talker. I can really kind of talk my way into a deal, out of trouble when needed. But I'm sure that's only one and probably a bit of a generalization, right? I think a lot of people assume all salespeople are extroverts. People assume engineers are introverts. In your experience, Ricky, what are some of the maybe less obvious things that salespeople and engineers can or have learned from each other?
Yeah, look, again, great question. I think there's a lot of generalization in both ways, but great selling, Devon, as you would agree, involves people who are technical, thoughtful, and focused. So listening, again, I think, again, just going back to very generalization flavor here, they like to listen. Introverts love to listen. Engineers love to listen. But it's about gathering information, right? It's all about making sure that you're solving the customer challenge. Your job is to understand where they are and needs of what they need to, fulfill in terms of, what the actual missing point is. And then being successful in any sales process, to me, is about following through systematic processes, right? So I think if that's something the two I feel have got a lot in common. I also find that the great salespeople are all about having a rhythm. So it's having the disco calls, then having the demo script, and having all of that lined up. So to me, the two actually can learn quite a bit from each other. Some of the other things that come to mind is just, I think people getting it done kind of mindset, just do it. People who like to just kind of, strong work ethic, show results, and empathetic. I think that's something that's common across both the fields.
I'm curious how your background has impacted how you hire for your team. Are there specific qualities that you look for in new sales talent?
A little bit like what you're doing to me on this call, to be honest, is like ability to think outside the box, right?
This is actually going to be Ricky. I don't know if that
this is true. I totally feel it. I appreciate the opportunity. Look, I think ability to think outside the box, think on your feet, relying on your experience, being yourself, having the right amount of confidence in your own ability to deliver success, being yourself. I think that's been huge in terms of how we've interviewed, how we brought our hiring process into the organization, and people who just like to get it done mindset, right? I think that's been huge. That's been massive for us, especially when you're running a business like we do, which is spread across different geos. There's a number of things that any business can teach anybody, right? But you've got to bring your own flavor. Otherwise, it does sound like as if you're a virtual assistant. So to me, is like having your own voice, having your own say, bringing about that additional flavor. So we rely heavily on people who just like to wake up, roll up their sleeves, and just get it done.
Yeah, I know you have a global team.
Yeah.
Obviously, you mentioned earlier what works in one geo doesn't work in the next. There's, trying to get tribal knowledge across, people that are new to the org and bring new perspectives, right? You have folks that know context of the organization. How do you go about scaling sales excellence as you expand your team, scaling both in size and across geos?
Yeah, such an important and a great question, right? To me, it just comes down to tool, people, process. Going back to the triangle of making sure each one work cohesively. So We talked about developing a clear, repeatable, and sales process, which obviously can be amplified to no matter which geo you go into. Second thing, I think a lot of people talk about this, implementing activity-based selling. Right? That's huge, especially in our field where I think a lot of times sales naturally gravitate to outcome. For us, it's about setting up your team for lasting success. It's about ensuring that not only do you focus on your goals, but focus on activities that lead to those goals, that takes the pressure off reps and gives you metrics to track. And obviously, to round it off, you need good technology that scale with you. Right? Scale. That's huge important, like huge important. I can't emphasize enough on that point. So making proactive decisions on scaling up is more than just getting out in front with people. It's about ensuring that you've got the tech to go with you, to give you that insights to make tough decisions. Are we going to go into Europe? Are we going to go into Canada? Are we going to go into Africa? You need that data insight and you need the learnings that you get from it before you actually go there. So technology has played a big part in where we are now, and it's going to continue to play a big part. So technology like Gong in itself, the fact we now have the ability to, in the last couple of years where I've been stuck in New Zealand, I have the ability to go actually how we're selling so successfully in the US market as well as UK market. What are the findings? What can we blend? What can we take from one market to the other? You know, platforms like yours give us the visibility and insights and what really works, and then kind of going back to our secret sauce and applying that all together has been hugely important.
Was there anything most surprising or shocking that maybe you kind of found as you're, maybe listening to calls or talking with your leaders of like, oh, I wouldn't expect that was, working so well, or, oh, I thought that would have worked better?
Again, putting me on the spot. Look, what I found, and I think some of the content that you also put up is when people actually open up and they throw in a F-bomb. Yeah. That's when you know people are just being open and they're ready to do business. It's surprising that if the customers or the prospects actually do that, they're comfortable and we're going to progress. Look, it's a funny note, but that really to me is about building trust, it's nurturing that relationship. So that's been a huge fact finding. And I think what I love about everything in terms of technology is that stats it can give you. I'm a big basketball fan too, and I'm a big rugby and cricket fan, of course. So it's all about the stats, as you know, right? It's all about, hey, what's your percentage to field goal? How, are you hitting a three-pointer? What about your 4s and 6s when it comes to cricket? It's the same kind of thing. It's the ability to kind of dig in and go, hey, that's what the top talent does, and this is where the C players need to step up their game in terms of, if you need to get to where they want to be. So again, data-centric, going back to really good insights and making those decisions.
Also a big basketball. Oh, sorry, Shino. Also a big basketball fan. And I'm happy that the limited cricket knowledge I have because my father-in-law, I know what a 4 and a 6 is, so I'm feeling pretty accomplished now, Ricky. But have you seen Moneyball?
I've seen it.
That's a great one. If folks haven't seen it yet, that's like the best, probably the first real transition of like data and big data analytics into sports. Phenomenal movie. I just watched it again a couple of weeks ago, and it's so applicable to what you're talking about, which is finding those pockets where you can win, finding the pockets where you're losing that maybe you're right underneath your nose and you have no idea. There's a lot of small decisions you can make that have a big impact. That, like you said, data can give you that insight.
I'm going to watch it again now that you've reminded me. Maybe on my plane ride over to your country next week.
A great way to enter the US.
Yeah. Yes.
So you talked about the activity-based selling, and in some ways, I think maybe you could talk a little bit about what that actually means and what activity are you tracking. But I suspect that a lot of that they're leading indicators to whether or not your deal is going to be successful or not. So again, before the outcome happens, like we were talking about. So I'm curious, tell us a little bit more about activity-based, and then are there certain metrics that you're looking at for those leading indicators?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, horses for courses. So I don't want to give you something which is a generalized view of what that is, but depending on the role, right? So when it comes to the closes, talk ratio, right? That's huge. If your talk ratio is higher than certain percentage, you know you're not a good listener, right? Good listening means you're missing out on information. Hey, I'm not throwing shade to anybody whose talk time is high necessarily, but what I'm saying, that just gives you the insight to go, hey, that's where you perhaps need to concentrate. Because normally, when you then correlate with, let's say, high talk ratio with churn and cancellation, you'd find there is something in common because you've just missed out on details. So I think having the ability to go into those kind of key insights and metrics and, activity is hugely important to us, Sheena, and same with when it comes to the SDRs, like talk ratio, like number of times you're making a call as opposed to, so what does your cadence look like? So there's a lot of experimentation. It's about ensuring that your key activity is actually directly related to the field you're serving. So for us, it's trade customers, field service customers. They love to talk. They're not the type of people who are just going to sit there and check emails all day long. So that is hugely important. So again, rounding that off with your ICP and making sure activity actually then is driven for, is focused on driving results.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I was a top performer at my previous company. When I joined Gong, obviously I used Gong, and my first 3 calls were over 80% talk time. And the light bulb went off, which was not that I have room to improve, but I was like, dang it, I'm one of those guys. I'm the sales guy who talks too much. Crap, I thought I was hot stuff. I thought I was good. And so, yeah, then it becomes a fun game to get as low as you can while obviously still having good calls. But, yeah, I'm with you there. And I think, too, it's like it's not a direct causation, right? Talking less isn't going to win you more deals, but listening more will give you the quote unquote ammo or the insights you need to put a better deal together. So I like how you said that, putting different correlations together. I hadn't even thought about with churn, but I'm sure there's a bunch of different things, you could kind of tie that to and get some great insight and coaching opportunities as well. So Ricky, I'm always curious what different KPIs or activity metrics that sales leaders look to or don't look at, that maybe others do, to kind of look at, productivity and overall revenue gen. So I'm curious, like, are there any things that you, as head of sales look at specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. So quality over quantity is one of the main things to really work through here for us, Stephen. So I think, whether it be number of calls you're making as a SDR or BDR, it's the touch point. So how many actual qualitative calls, connections you're making is one. And when it comes to the reps who are actually closing deals, close win ratio to me is not necessarily the leading indicator as to how successful one is. It's about behind the scenes. It's deep diving into what activities are actually getting you in front of the customers to make sure that you are having those really good conversations, because their close win ratio may not be there right now, but they're having really deep, meaningful conversations, and they're building a healthy pipeline, which may come to fruition down the track, right? So I don't necessarily think one stat should be your leading indicator, no matter which field you're in sales, or in fact any part of the business. So that for us is massive, the way we think about things here at simPRO.
I like it. Yeah, it's an effort metric, right? Which is good to look at in certain scenarios. But there's always kind of an older school way of thinking, which is like you need 50 dials a day or 100 dials a day. There's people that might say, I actually only need 10 emails a day to get to build pipeline, or just to use that example. So yeah, it's definitely more kind of value driven than volume driven, in my opinion.
So given that you have an engineering background, I suspect that you've been able to build relationships pretty effectively with your peers on the engineering product side of the house, because you kind of lived and breathed that for some part of your career. So what advice would you have for other sales leaders who are maybe trying to navigate those relationships?
Wow. Our CTO may disagree, but
I was going to say maybe they're like, he's a trader. He went from engineering to sales, and he's dead to us.
That's it. They don't even talk to me, so it's this might be a call out. Hey, look, great question. It really is just about, like anything in the business, is about understanding each other's love language, as I refer to, whether it be marketing or whether it be technology or product. Understand that different people think differently when it comes to problem solving. We all are trying to solve problems as a team. So our tech co-workers are detail orientated, so they want to have as much information possible at their fingertips. So if you can give them a script to a call where you've just come off with a prospect, you felt like if you had that particular feature and you could get that, give them the link, right? Give them the script, let them actually hear it from the voice of a customer. That's really powerful and meaningful. So making those connections is hugely and vastly important, I think, for our tech co-workers who don't necessarily have the ability to connect with the end users as often. So sales and marketing in particular play a big part in that, right? So be the enabler, be the bridge of connecting the two dots. So that would be my one simple advice: connect people.
I love that. And like using that evidence as bringing that relationship together. It's great.
Shall we?
Dev, you want to move into the last question? I feel like we could.
Yeah,
wrap it?
we're gonna move.
Yeah?
We're gonna wrap, and Ricky, you're a good sport because we did give you a full prep and then ask about half those questions and half of our own. But that just shows that it was a true conversation, right? Relatively unscripted. So we appreciate that. So I'm gonna throw one more at you, but this is a fun one, so nothing to worry. We ask all of the guests on the show the same question to wrap up, which is, Ricky, how would you describe sales in one word?
Fun.
There you go. No hesitation.
Yeah, right on.
Fantastic. I get that vibe from you, Ricky, after hanging out with you for the last half hour or so. So feels on brand to me.
I love what you do.
I appreciate it. I thank you for having me on the show. It's been great connecting with you, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
For the opportunity.
Likewise.
Safe travels.